What if I told you that your soul never forgot? Only you did. That deep beneath the noise of your mind, your past, your name, even your body, something ancient has been waiting patiently, not to teach you, but to remind you. This isn't about belief. It's not about religion. It's about a memory so real, so undeniable, that when it returns, you don't question it. You recognize it, like waking up from a long dream, gasping for air, and realizing it was never the dream that mattered. It was what you forgot while dreaming. Somewhere along the way, you stopped being who you are and started being who you were told to be. Not out of weakness, not out of failure, but because the world around you was built on forgetting. And the most dangerous thing you could do in a world like that is remember. This forgotten memory isn't some poetic metaphor. It's an actual state of awareness, a deep resonance within you that, once touched, rewrites everything you thought you knew about yourself. Most people go their whole lives chasing purpose, meaning, identity, without realizing what they're really chasing is a memory their soul has always carried. The forbidden technique is not about learning something new. It's about peering through the static, the layers of falsehood, the inherited voices in your head, and brushing against that hidden current that's never left you. A current that flows not in your blood, but in your being. And once you feel it, even for a moment, you'll never be the same again. This isn't spiritual theory. It's not mysticism for the sake of mystery. It's the most practical, raw, and intimate truth that can be known. The truth of your original essence. Before you were shaped by culture, by fear, by memory, there was you. Not your personality, not your preferences, not even your story. Just pure, unfiltered awareness, being, presence. And that presence isn't gone. It's simply buried. Not by evil, not by chance, but by distraction. By the layers of mental noise that have been added on top of who you are until your reflection became unrecognizable. Think about it. You came into this world knowing how to feel, how to love, how to exist, but soon you were told what to believe, what to fear, how to behave, and what to become. Layer by layer, the raw signal of your soul was coated in other people's frequencies, and you were taught to call that noise you, but deep down, you always knew something wasn't right. That quiet feeling you get late at night when the world is quiet and your mind wanders, that pull in your chest, that ache in your heart. It's not confusion, it's memory. Your soul hasn't been lost. It's been knocking on the inside of your consciousness, hoping you'd stop long enough to hear it. This is the truth most people never tell you. Remembering who you are is not about adding more to yourself. It's about removing, untangling, clearing the interference. And when you do, what remains is not a better version of you. It's the real you, the one who doesn't need validation, the one who doesn't need fixing, the one who already knows. That knowing doesn't come with words or logic. It comes as a vibration, a quiet certainty that rises from within and silences everything else. A stillness so deep it becomes the loudest thing in your life. This is why the forbidden technique is not dangerous to you. It's dangerous to the systems that benefit from your forgetting, because a soul that remembers is powerful, not loud, not violent, not arrogant, but steady, immovable. A remembered soul does not seek approval, it radiates truth, and that truth cannot be sold, silenced, or rewritten. That's why this technique was buried, not because it failed, but because it worked too well. And here's the real paradox. The technique isn't something external. It's not a tool. It's not even a method. It's a moment, a shift, an opening inside you that's already trying to happen. You don't need to force it. You don't need to earn it. You only need to allow it. That's the secret. It's not hard. It's just unfamiliar. Because you've been taught to seek outside, to chase, to fix, to acquire. But remembrance, it happens when you stop, when you let go, when you drop beneath the noise and sit still enough to hear the one voice that's always been speaking, the voice of your soul. You might feel like you're far from that place right now, like you've wandered too far off the path. But that's the illusion. The truth is, you've never left it. You've just been walking with your eyes closed. And now, for the first time in what might be lifetimes, you're starting to blink them open. That's why you're here. That's why you're listening. Because part of you already remembers, and it's ready to guide the rest of you home. What if the truth was never hidden in the dark? but simply made too bright for the eyes of the world to see? What if the reason you've never heard of this technique isn't because it was erased, but because it was buried beneath layers of noise, dressed in fear and whispered about only in secret? This knowledge, the one that leads you back to the memory of your soul, was never truly lost. It was forbidden, and not for the reasons you might think. It wasn't forbidden because it was dangerous to you. It was forbidden because it was dangerous to the ones who built their power on your forgetting. Because the moment you remember who you are, everything that controls you loses its grip, not through rebellion or force, but through realization. A remembered soul doesn't obey out of fear. It doesn't chase validation. It doesn't get pulled into every storm, every narrative, every distraction. That kind of soul is steady, grounded, sovereign. It doesn't need external approval because it is anchored in something eternal. That is what they feared. Not your anger, not your questions, but your clarity. Because clarity cannot be manipulated. You see, control doesn't require chains. It just needs confusion. If you keep a person confused about who they are, you can guide their actions, shape their beliefs, sell them identities, feed them distractions, and convince them to fear their own reflection. But if they remember, truly remember, the illusion falls apart. Throughout history, the guardians of this remembrance were hunted, discredited, mocked, and not all at once. The strategy was subtle. Replace sacred silence with noise, replace personal ritual with collective performance, replace inner knowing with outer authority. Tell people the divine is somewhere else, up there, out there, never here. Tell them the answers are too complex, the truth too mysterious, the self too sinful. And above all, never let them sit still long enough to feel what's already inside them. That's how remembrance became forbidden, not by force, but by misdirection. That's how the most powerful truth became the most overlooked. And that's how you were taught to doubt the only thing that's ever really been yours, your soul. But it didn't start with forgetting. It started with remembering. Every ancient culture, every old tradition, every sacred symbol, they all pointed to one thing. You already know, not with your mind, with your being. They called it different names. In some places, it was the breath of the divine. In others, it was the inner flame, the secret name, the mirror of truth. But the meaning was the same. Your essence is whole, eternal, and connected to everything. The soul was never meant to be discovered. It was meant to be uncovered. That's what the forbidden technique does. It lifts the veil that was placed not over your eyes, but over your remembrance. And here's where it becomes even more fascinating. Across continents, languages, and philosophies, the essence of this technique was known and guarded. In ancient Egypt, the inner temples were never just places of worship. They were memory chambers. The initiates didn't just pray. They entered into symbolic death, laying still as their bodies rested while their consciousness was guided beyond the veil. They didn't believe. They experienced. And when they returned, they didn't just carry information. They carried transformation. They had crossed the boundary of forgetting and come back with memory etched into their vibration. In the mystery schools of Greece, the soul wasn't seen as flawed, but as divine and exiled, temporarily caught in a human form, journeying back toward its origin. They used trance states, chants, and breath to soften the edges of the physical world, allowing glimpses into the eternal. They didn't teach dogma. They taught techniques for remembering, not philosophies but practices, direct experience. And once the soul remembered, even briefly, it changed the person forever. Because you can't unknow what your soul shows you. You can try to forget again. You can try to go back to sleep, but something in you stays awake. In India, the rishis taught remembrance through a process called smarana. It wasn't about seeking new truths, but about recalling what the soul already knows. To them, forgetting wasn't ignorance, it was misalignment. When you're disconnected, you forget. When you realign, you remember. Through deep meditation, stillness, and vibration, they taught people to drop below the noise of thought and into the clarity of being. They didn't ask you to worship, they asked you to listen to the silence that contains the answer, to the breath that carries ancient memory, to the space between thoughts where the soul still speaks. Even indigenous cultures, far removed from the centers of power, knew of this path. They spoke of dream time, of spirit animals, of soul songs that carry your essence across lifetimes. They didn't call it forbidden, they called it sacred. But as outside influence grew, even these traditions were silenced, labeled as primitive, outlawed, or forgotten. The result? A planet full of people chasing meaning while ignoring the one place it has always lived, within themselves. And still, through all the suppression, the thread never fully snapped. It went underground, into symbols, into whispers, into quiet lineages passed down in secret. Because the truth is, remembrance can't be destroyed. It can only be delayed. The moment someone sits still, listens deep enough, and begins to feel the gentle hum of their soul rising to the surface, that's when the technique reactivates. Not by force, not by belief, but by resonance. It was always waiting for the moment you'd be ready, not ready to learn something new, but ready to remember what you've never truly lost. At some point, the world around you shifted, quietly, without warning. What was once sacred became symbolic, then decorative, then hollow. The rituals remained, but the meaning was removed. The teachings were rewritten, but the essence was lost. What was once a living path to remembrance became theatre, a performance done out of habit, obligation, fear, and no one questioned it, because they were taught not to, taught that questioning meant danger, that silence was weakness, that tradition, even when empty, was truth. But if you look closely, if you really pay attention, you'll see the cracks. You'll notice that much of what you were taught to believe isn't rooted in inner truth. It's built to keep you from seeking it. The forbidden technique wasn't just hidden, it was replaced, not by accident, by design. First, they replaced inner knowing with outer authority. You were taught to trust titles more than intuition. You were told the answers were always out there, in books, in institutions, in someone older, someone holier, someone louder. And slowly, you stopped listening to your own voice. Not because it stopped speaking, but because the world became too noisy for you to hear it. Then they replaced presence with performance. You were taught how to act, how to speak, how to dress, how to behave in ways that would earn approval, not because that's who you are, but because that's what keeps systems stable. Next came distraction, endless information, entertainment, noise disguised as wisdom. And the more distracted you became, the harder it was to remember that your soul doesn't thrive on answers. It thrives on stillness. All of it was part of a pattern. Break the original technique into fragments, strip it of its power, sell it back in diluted form, and call it tradition. But tradition without truth is sleepwalking. And when enough people walk in their sleep, they start building systems to protect their dreams, even when those dreams are nightmares. That's how forgetting became normalized, not just tolerated, but celebrated. You're called wise when you memorize, not when you remember. You're called successful when you conform, not when you awaken. But that's changing, slowly, quietly. The veil is thinning and more people are starting to feel the ache of something missing. A silent whisper that says, this isn't it, there's more. And the most powerful part, that more is already inside you. Your soul has not forgotten. It's simply waiting beneath the surface, beneath the mental programs, the emotional noise, the habits you think are yours. That's why remembering feels like coming home, not because you gain something new, but because you finally remove what was never you to begin with. The technique begins here. Not in reading, not in studying, but in undoing, in peeling back the layers of what was installed so that what's always been there can breathe again. That's why the first phase of the forbidden technique is deprogramming. Not through rebellion, not through violence, through awareness, gentle, deep, honest awareness. Start with your thoughts. Whose voice is that? The one that tells you what's possible, the one that questions your worth, the one that repeats old fears like they're facts. Is that really you? Or is that something you picked up and never questioned? Watch your behaviors, your patterns, your reactions. Are you acting from memory or from programming, from instinct or from imitation? The soul doesn't speak in noise, it speaks in clarity. And clarity begins when you pause long enough to observe, not just the world around you, but the world inside you. This isn't about blame, it's about discernment. It's about recognizing what's been layered over your soul so you can begin the process of gently removing it. One layer at a time, you begin to notice that not every fear is real, that not every desire is yours, that much of what you chase isn't even what your soul wants, it's what you were told to want. And once you see that, truly see it, you begin to reclaim power. Not power over others, power from within. A steady, calm certainty that says, I know who I am, and I no longer need permission to remember. Then comes the second phase, activating your inner sense. This is not intuition in the modern sense of the word. It's not a guess or a gut feeling. It's a perception deeper than thought, older than emotion. It's the part of you that doesn't just think or feel, it knows. Most people walk through life with this sense dormant, dulled by constant stimulation, suffocated by constant thought. But when the noise begins to fade, through silence, breath, presence, this inner sense stirs. It's like a memory surfacing not as an image, but as a frequency. You don't see it with your eyes. You feel it with your being. That's the gift of this technique. It doesn't ask you to imagine something outside of yourself. It invites you to notice what's already there. This inner sense is awakened through practice, not pressure, through sacred silence, through breathing that's not just physical but energetic, through symbolic imagination, images that aren't just fantasies, but keys to ancient truths. A lotus blooming in your heart, a flame in your belly, a mirror behind your eyes. These are not inventions. They are blueprints your soul remembers. Used with presence and intention, they awaken not ideas, but experiences. Not belief, but knowing. That's why the imagination is sacred. It's not childish, it's primal. What you imagine with devotion, your soul treats as real. And through that inner experience, it begins to remember its own reflection. And then comes the third phase, resonance with your true name. This is not the name you were given. It's not spoken out loud. It's not something anyone else can tell you. It's a vibration unique to your essence, a frequency that only you recognize. When this frequency is touched, something clicks. Everything false begins to fade. Everything real begins to rise. You stand in your truth, not because you figured it out, but because you embodied it. It's not about having the answers. It's about becoming the answer. The soul doesn't wake up with logic. It wakes up with alignment. When your breath, your body, your attention, and your intention all come into harmony, the signal comes through, clear, undeniable. And when that happens, you don't just remember, you return. This process doesn't happen overnight. It's not instant, but it's inevitable when you commit. The moment you say yes to remembering, the universe begins clearing the path. Not always comfortably, but always truthfully. And step by step, breath by breath, you begin to live from a place deeper than identity, deeper than story. You live from essence, and in that place, there is no fear of forgetting again, because the vibration is too strong. The light is too steady. The memory is too real. That is the power of the forbidden technique. Not that it gives you something new, but that it gives you back to yourself. There is a name you've never spoken, not with your mouth, not even with your mind, but your soul knows it. It's not written in any language, and yet it's the most accurate thing that's ever described you. It's not a sound, it's not a label, it's a frequency, a vibration, a tone that exists outside of words, but when you feel it, you'll know instantly, this is me, not the version of you shaped by time, struggle, fear, or ambition. Not the you that was molded to fit expectations or survive a system, but the essence that existed before any of that, the original pulse, and it's been there all along, waiting for you to call it, not with a voice, but with your state of being. That's the power of resonance. That's what the forbidden technique unlocks. You see, every being has this hidden name, a frequency that aligns every part of their energy into coherence. When you touch it, things begin to harmonize. Confusion begins to melt. Doubt loses its grip, and even if you don't understand it intellectually, something deep inside you stands up straighter, breathes deeper, and says, yes, I remember this. You don't need to explain it. You just need to embody it. You don't find your soul's true name through study. You find it through tuning, through presence, through stripping away everything that's not you, until what's left is too real to be denied. That's why the technique is not about learning more, it's about aligning more. Aligning your breath with your awareness, your body with your energy, your intention with your silence. And when that alignment becomes stable, the signal comes through. It may not come as a vision, it may not come as words, but you'll feel it. A warmth, a pulse, a stillness that's more alive than movement. In that space, your soul begins to hum its ancient melody again. And even if it's faint at first, the memory it carries is unmistakable. You don't have to force anything, you don't have to pretend, you just have to get quiet enough to let the real you emerge. But here's the truth most avoid: not everything you remember is light. As your essence rises, so does your shadow. Because your soul has not only stored your brilliance, it's also stored your pain, your unspoken grief, the moments you buried because they hurt too much, the parts of yourself you exiled to survive. When you remember who you truly are, you also remember what you've denied. And that is not a flaw in the process, it is the process. The forbidden technique doesn't protect you from your shadow, it reveals it. And it does so with terrifying clarity, not to break you, but to free you. This is where most people stop. This is where they turn back. Because remembering the light of your soul is blissful, it's uplifting, it feels like coming home. But remembering the parts you've hidden, that takes courage, that takes maturity. It takes the willingness to look in the mirror with no filters, no excuses, and say, yes, this too is part of me. The anger you suppress, the shame you carry, the lies you told yourself to avoid feeling pain. They all rise not to punish you, but to be seen, to be met, to be integrated. Because you cannot become whole while rejecting parts of yourself. You cannot hold your full light while running from your darkness. And yet, this is the most sacred part of remembrance. Because when you face what you once feared and choose to embrace it instead, it transforms. Shadow becomes teacher. Pain becomes wisdom. Every wound becomes an opening, not to weakness, but to truth. The forgotten parts of you do not want to harm you. They want to be healed. They want to return. And the moment you stop fighting them and begin to listen, the most profound kind of alchemy begins. You don't fix your shadow. You love it into wholeness. And in doing so, your vibration becomes clearer, stronger, more complete. This stage of the technique is raw. It's emotional. It's sacred. And it cannot be skipped. Because to fully remember who you are, you must also remember who you are not. You must remember the stories you inherited but never agreed to, the roles you played to stay safe, the masks you wore so the world would accept you. All of that must be seen, not to be judged, but to be released, because your soul does not blame you. It does not hold your past against you. It simply wants to return. And it can only return when you make space, not just for the light, but for the truth. And when that space is made, something subtle begins to shift. You start feeling less like you're searching and more like you're arriving. You stop reaching for something outside and start recognizing what's always been inside. That's when you begin to move through the world differently. You're no longer driven by fear because your soul has become your compass. You're no longer addicted to validation because the presence within you is enough. You're no longer terrified of silence because you've found that silence holds everything you ever needed to know. In this stage of remembering, you start to feel a deep sense of compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. You realize that the forgetting was part of the journey, that every wound, every mistake, every wrong turn wasn't a detour, it was a teacher, a sacred step in the dance of awakening. And from that place, you begin to love yourself in a way that isn't fragile or conditional. You love yourself as the soul loves you, fully, without hesitation. And that kind of love doesn't just change how you see yourself, it changes how you move through reality. So yes, the forbidden technique is powerful. Yes, it awakens memory. Yes, it reveals your light. But its real magic lies in its ability to bring back every part of you, even the ones you tried to leave behind. Because your soul has never been partial. It has always been whole, and now, finally, you're starting to become whole with it. The light, the shadow, the silence, the sound, the memory, the name, all returning, all resonating, all waiting for one thing, your willingness to remember. Remembering who you are isn't something that happens once and stays with you effortlessly. It's not a single lightning bolt of insight that fixes everything or a perfect moment that changes the rest of your life forever. It's more like a rhythm, a returning, a steady unfolding, a sacred maintenance of presence, a relationship with truth that must be honored every day, not with pressure, but with reverence. Because awakening isn't the end, it's the beginning. And living from that awakened place, that's where the real work begins. Once you've touched the essence of your soul, your life must rise to meet it. Every breath, every choice, every word becomes part of the remembrance. And if you don't weave the truth of your soul into the fabric of your daily life, the noise will pull you back, slowly, quietly, without resistance. Until one day, you realize that even though you once remembered, you've started to forget again. That's why the Forbidden Technique doesn't just teach you how to remember, it teaches you how to live the remembrance, in the silence of ordinary moments, in the patterns of daily behavior, in the way you look at a stranger or speak to a friend or walk into a room. The soul doesn't want grand gestures, it wants honesty, intention, presence, a return to simplicity. The most powerful spiritual act isn't climbing a mountain to meditate, it's pausing for 3 conscious breaths in the middle of a chaotic day and feeling the quiet pulse of eternity within you. That is the temple, that is the initiation, that is the sacred becoming practical. You begin by making space, active silence, not just the absence of noise, but the fullness of attention. You create a small sanctuary in your day, maybe 5 minutes, maybe just 1, but it's yours. No distractions, no agenda, just being. And in that stillness, your soul starts to speak again. Not in words, but in sensation, in energy, in quiet recognition. That moment is not doing nothing, it's doing everything. Because that's where the remembering roots itself. That's where it becomes real. Then you extend that presence outward, into movement, into behavior. You start turning your actions into offerings, not to a god, not to an idea, but to the soul within you. You eat not just to fill your body, but to honor it. You walk not just to get somewhere, but to feel your feet kissing the earth. You speak not to impress, but to resonate. Even the smallest act, washing your hands, closing a door, lighting a candle, can become sacred if it's done with remembrance. Life becomes ritual, not rigid, not forced, just meaningful. And that meaning doesn't have to be explained, it just has to be lived. You also begin to protect your inner space like something holy, because it is. What you watch, what you hear, what you scroll through, what you laugh at or repeat, it all enters your energetic field, and your field is the soil where remembrance takes root. Garbage in, confusion out, beauty in, clarity out. It's not about judgment, it's about discernment. You become a guardian of your vibration, not because you're fragile, but because you're finally aware that your energy is sacred, and sacred things must be cared for. And when you speak, you learn to speak less, but with more depth. You no longer echo borrowed thoughts or quote wisdom you haven't lived. You speak from a quieter place, a deeper place, from within, from the remembrance itself. And when you do, people feel it. They may not know why, but something in them responds, because truth has a resonance that no argument can replicate. Your voice becomes a vessel, not for information, but for vibration. And that vibration can awaken others, not by teaching, but by being. Then comes the shift, the quiet, irreversible shift where you begin to live as if you've already remembered, not to pretend, not to fake it, but to tune into it. The soul responds to faith, not blind faith, but embodied trust. When you walk, speak, love, and decide as if you know who you are, even if part of you still doubts, the soul rises to meet you. It begins to fill the space you create. The more you live aligned with that essence, the more real it becomes. It's like remembering backwards. You don't wait to remember in order to act. You act in alignment in order to remember. And the more you live this way, the less you need. Not because you're denying yourself, but because you've stopped chasing what was never yours. You don't need endless validation because you've validated your soul. You don't need the world to understand you because you've understood yourself. You don't need to numb the emptiness because you've filled it with presence. That's the paradox of remembrance. The more you embody your soul, the more everything external loses its grip, and the more the world begins to meet you with quiet grace. And this is when the most beautiful and terrifying truth of all begins to reveal itself. You never truly forgot. The memory was always there, buried beneath layers of distraction, noise, trauma, and identity, but your soul never stopped whispering. And now, finally, you're listening. The remembering has already begun, and once it begins, it does not stop. Even if you fall back into patterns, even if you forget again, something in you stays awake, watching, waiting, guiding. This isn't a linear journey, it's a spiral. And every time you return to your center, the remembering deepens, the light grows steadier, the vibration becomes clearer. That's why this technique was never a secret formula to be sold. It was a sacred fire to be kept alive, not with force, with presence, with care, with truth. And that's the invitation, not to become someone new, but to become who you've always been beneath the forgetting. The truth is, you are not broken. You are not lost. You are layered. And the remembering is the gentle, sacred removal of everything that was never really you. What's left is not emptiness, it's truth. And it changes everything. You stop needing to prove. You stop needing to explain. You stop needing to chase. Instead, you live fully, openly, authentically, from your soul. And when you do, others will feel it. Not because you said the right words, but because you remembered. And that memory is contagious. A remembered soul doesn't need to preach. It simply exists as a mirror, and others, upon seeing their reflection, begin to stir. This is how the world changes, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Not through domination or division, but through silent revolution. The kind that begins in the heart and spreads through resonance. The kind that cannot be stopped because it's not trying to conquer anything. It's simply remembering everything, and so are you. You're not here to learn, you're here to remember, and that remembering has already begun.